Hi, Dr. Malloy. As you know, this proposal is for a descriptive study of Campbell Hall's hiring process. Because one thing that really matters in an institution's drive to create a successful school culture is in their ability to get the right people through the door. This proposal aims to follow up on an idea that I explored on a theoretical and academic level at the end of EDUC 508 when we were asked to identify a problem of practice. The issue of finding and hiring the right people was one that I found so interesting and pervasive that I wanted to study it at a local level and bring insight to a process that may lead to positive change or at least to more intentional practice at my own school. The purpose of this proposal is to explicitly articulate how I will look at a process that occurs at my institution. My research question is deceptively simple. What is the nature of Campbell Hall's hiring practices? All I want to do is to describe the process as it currently exists. Within this big question are a couple of sub-questions. The first one is, what processes are in place for hiring new teachers, and how consistently are these processes applied? Remember, Campbell Hall is a K-12 school. That means we have 3 different divisions, elementary, junior high, and high school, and lots of different academic departments. This means that for each new hire, there are a lot of different people involved in the process. When so many people are involved, it's important to look closely to see what's happening at each level. Some things may be happening consistently, and others may not be. I'd also like to explore what barriers or challenges are present in the existing process. And the final question is, how satisfied are the stakeholders with the hiring process? Please note, again, I'm only talking about the process here, not the outcome. I'm not asking how successful the teachers ultimately are. That's a much larger question. When I mention satisfaction of stakeholders in this question, I'm really talking about the people who go through the process. I'm talking about the candidates and the administrators who do the hiring. A preliminary literature review begins to help us understand what we already know in terms of the hiring process. The first thing we know is that getting the right people through the door is imperative to a successful school culture. Here's just one statistic that drives that point home. Stanford professor Eric Heneshek figured out that a good teacher can get an entire year's worth of learning out of his or her students in comparison with a less effective teacher. So, what we know is that the hiring process really does matter. If we care about student learning in our school, this is a process that's worth looking at. Previous studies have also shown that there are aspects of Campbell Hall's hiring practice that should be questioned. There are many studies that suggest effective ways to run an interview. For instance, the idea of asking behavior-based questions, which means you are asking questions about how people behaved in the past to gain a sense of how they will behave on the job. Other studies suggest that structured interviews lead to more accurate perceptions of the candidate. And several studies question the efficacy of watching a teacher teach a sample lesson and whether those perceptions can really be correlated with a teacher's ultimate effectiveness and success in the classroom. However, until we do our own descriptive study, none of these studies can actually be of much use to us because we don't have a clear data-based view and fundamental understanding of what's currently happening at our institution. As I've stated over and over, this is a descriptive study. That means I'm not coming in with a hypothesis. Rather, this study utilizes grounded theory in which data is examined and then the theory is developed inductively from that data. I'm also not planning to manipulate any variables during the course of this study. I'm simply seeking to describe a phenomenon that already exists at my school site. I will be using qualitative data only that will be based on in-depth interviews. My goal in this study is to create a thick description of the process. In other words, I want to be able to create on paper the process as realistically and as truthfully as possible. The credibility of the data that I get in the participant interviews can be judged through triangulation. I will be speaking with several people who were in on the hiring process for the same candidate. That way, I will get a sense of the process through several different lenses. And then, of course, I will be doing member checks where I will write up the conversations that I had with those involved and then allow them to reread their remarks so that they have an opportunity to tell me how to change their presentation to best reflect reality as they see it. The goal is for the participant interviews to be as truthful a reflection of their experience as possible. Sampling and methods. I'm going to have to use a purposeful sampling technique for this particular study because Campbell Hall has a very low turnover rate, which means that in any given year, we'll only be hiring about 6 people. This means that as I conduct this study, I have to do my best to include all the people involved in every single one of the hiring situations in this particular year. I plan to include the people doing the hiring, from the division principals to the department chairs to the co-teachers to the assistant headmaster to the headmaster to the director of counseling, as well as the candidates themselves. Quick note, obviously not every hiring situation involves all those people, but anyone on that list may be included. Because of the low turnover, this isn't a situation where I could go in and do a random sampling. This study necessitates the development of predetermined interview questions about the hiring process. It may make sense to pilot some of the questions offsite at a similar school to make sure the formulated questions are eliciting the best possible and most informative responses. On the other hand, the relationship that the researchers develop with the subjects is of utmost importance during this process. The researchers will be given the leeway to follow up and to push gently for more information within the interview process. In addition, this study necessitates follow-up interviews and member checks so the researchers will have plenty of opportunity to re-ask and reformulate questions to get the data that best describes this process. Ethics and human relation aspects of this study have the potential to get a little sticky and require a great deal of thought and expertise to handle appropriately. But one thing that unsticks this issue a little bit is to remember that this study is about perceptions of a process, not about perceptions of an outcome. If we start getting into outcome, we start looking at teacher evaluation, which goes way beyond the scope of new hires. In order to interview anyone involved with the hiring process, I will first need to gain their consent. The consent form and conversations prior to signing the consent form will explicitly deal with the issue of process versus outcome. The form will also assure participants that they will remain anonymous in the write-up of the study. All this speaks to the researcher-participant connection. The researcher must be able to establish a relationship that includes a great deal of trust. The researcher is seeking to get to the heart of what's going on in this process. A challenge that the researcher will need to overcome is the fact that the teachers are never more vulnerable than in their first year, whether it's their first year of teaching in general or the first year at a specific school site. The researchers must be able to respect the new hire's circumstances by allowing the new hire to opt out at any point, while also articulating the importance of the study to anyone involved to gain buy-in and trust. Ethics and human relations also had a great deal to do with the research design of this study. While it was tempting to suggest the researchers could observe the process, it was ultimately unethical. It would have been inappropriate to sit and observe the hiring process without the candidate's consent. But it is unfair to ask a candidate to sign a consent form before being hired because he or she may feel compelled to participate in order to get the job. At its very heart, this study is about building community. At our school, we think a lot about the process of student admissions, and so we're very intentional about building that part of our community. But we're less intentional about building the faculty part of our community. This descriptive study is our first step in moving in that direction.